at 6:40 p.m. Would everyone please rise as we say the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under old business, we have ordinances for public hearing, Ordinance 1307, an ordinance relating to the levy and assessment of taxes, presented by myself on behalf of the administration. Mr. Hafner? Has this gone through finance?
Yes, it has.
All right, Chairman Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. This one went before the Finance Subcommittee last Wednesday, and the Finance Committee has made a recommendation, 3-0, to recommendation to the full council for passage.
Councilor Dwyer moves passage. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Murray. We'll declare the public hearing open at 6:41 p.m. Mr. Sylvia, do you want to have a presentation or do explanation or what the bill does?
Sure. Previously, the language stated that the rate would be set by the audited collection rate of the first quarter of the prior year at that level or 1% less. We'd like to move to the audited collection rate of the prior year up to 1% above that, or 1% over the 5-year average. The language might have said 1% or less, but since its inception, it had been utilized as 1% or greater, level or greater by 1%.
Yeah.
So we'd like to amend to reflect that. This was initiated by a lower than anticipated collection rate from the audit that was done for fiscal year 2012. What was in the budget for FY13 was a proposed estimated collection rate of 44.5%, and what was audited for the last first quarter of 2012 was 42.76.
That was the actual collection rate?
Correct. Whereas the 5-year average was a 44.2%. Over
The
the
5-year average would have been 44.2?
Correct.
So how does that solve your problem?
Well, we can, with this ordinance, we can go to 44.2% or 1% above that. So we could take the either or. We could take the 1% over the last collection rate, which was 42.76, or we could take 1% over the 5-year average, which was 44.2.
And this has it looks like it has 44.35.
That's correct. That's what's on proposal for tonight's collection, for tonight's levy.
I know that former Councilor Mutter drafted the original legislation. I know that he's here. Have you discussed this with him?
We had a few meetings regarding, yes.
Mayor, do you want to be heard?
Well,
I always like to hear from
yeah,
school committee member Mutter now on these issues because, as you know, you were on board with him, I think, tailored a lot of this legislation originally because of issues during the administration prior to your taking office initially.
yeah, and the levy sheet was a result of budgets that have been, or tax rates that have been passed absent audits, which was not a very good idea. So this requires that, but it also, the reason that we think it makes sense to amend it to an average is because when this legislation was passed, there were no averages because there wasn't a history of the ordinance being in place. Today we have the history. We have, for some reasons that I can recall, but of course Steve Werner was managing some of the issues having to do with timing of tax sales and that type of thing. But we had a lower rate of collection in the first quarter last year, And the way the ordinance currently sits, if we followed the ordinance as presented and didn't do a 5-year average, then the tax rate, instead of being close to a 1% increase, would be closer to 3%. And I don't think that was the intent of the budget of this council. So we see that when you have a lower than expected collection, there should be some way to average that so that you can maintain tax increases that are predictable. And that's the reason for putting this language in. I'm sure that our former president could weigh in on that if you like, but I think that he does share that thinking, although I'm sure that he would explain it a lot clearer than I just did.
I'd love to hear from him.
You're being called up, Jeff.
It's my levy worksheet expert.
Jeff Mutter, 15 Kent Street. I think the original intention of the '04 ordinance was that an administration couldn't come in and use a collection rate that was just completely
Artificial.
not possible, and in which to have a tax rate that they wanted to present to the council and to the public. So, and it happened. So the ordinance was designed so that you just couldn't do it. You know, you had to meet that prerequisite. So this does the same. I mean, I don't recall I knew the language was a little ambiguous there, and at times we weren't sure whether it meant we could go one up or one down.
Yeah.
It seems when I read it this time that it was clearly you had to go down. So I think in the past we interpreted it differently. So it was good to clear it up. It should be. So I don't have any problem with using the average in this case. The last collection rate was low. I think it was due to the lack of a tax sale, but I'm not the mayor, so I don't really know. But that would handicap you and to use a rate that would be 1% less,
Yeah.
and really bring the levy up. As long as you're not using a number that is so out of the ordinary, it is an estimate anyway. You know,
Right.
you don't have a concrete. But if you get the bills out on time, history has shown that the rate has been pretty close to that. So I'm in favor of that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Does anyone wish to speak in favor? Does anyone wish to speak against? Declare the public hearing closed. 6:47 p.m. Restrict comments to the council. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Council Lambie.
I just want to be sure that in voting for this amendment, that the council will still have the ability to discuss the actual tax levy and tax rate, have the ability to modify it. And it looks as though it does. I just want to make sure that that the council would agree to that in reading
What do you
this
mean by modify it? On the next ordinance?
next ordinance.
Brian, do you have a? The collection rate would have to be within the parameters of the ordinance, is the short answer. But,
Right. This ordinance is, only has to do with setting new regulations on the administration's method of preparing a collection rate. It has nothing to do with then, what the council then adopts for a levy. And you can then amend it as you so choose.
So I guess
How does the collection rate factor into the determination of the levy?
Probably better off getting Jeff back up here for that, but they're all tied together. A lower collection rate would require, as was indicated, if we
I mean, we're
Say-
unsynchronized, and that has effect on this process, correct?
right, say for example, as the mayor had alluded to, say for example we stayed with a 43% collection rate for this levy, it would require a
How does that collection rate number, what does that apply to? One of the quarters that we're collecting? Is it the first quarter of the
it's the
next?
first quarter, yes.
That's the only thing it applies to?
The 44 that we're speaking of, the 44.35 is only referencing
Because
the first
we've already
quarter.
collected the other money.
Well, the rest is then it will be collected in FY14. So the
Well, there's part of the current fiscal year we're in.
yes.
We're collecting
This,
some of
so
that money
when you're
this year.
setting this, it'll be the revenue that's collected by the May 31st deadline,
Okay.
May 31st collection. The rest of the collections from this levy will be collected in FY14. It'll be,
But what are you collecting? What bill are you paying? Are you paying the current budget?
it'll be collected in the current year, it will be in the current budget.
Not
Currently
the-
in
Not the proposed budget in July?
No, in FY13, in account number 213, currently, with the budget that was adopted in June, you have a budget already for 2013 taxes of $26,818,280. And this is the levy for that, as well as the next
So
three
the
quarters.
levy matches what was in the budget?
It's a little bit less, actually. What was,
little
what
less.
was proposed in the budget was a 1.2 levy and rate increase. This is being proposed, the next item is 1.06.
Okay. Council Lambie, you can.
I just want to be sure, Mr. Silva, that if the council decided, let's say this budget year, not to have any rate increase, so the rate would remain at $15.61, would that amendment to the ordinance we'll discuss later on this evening, would that rate be allowed under this amended ordinance?
If staying at the current rate, the tax rates, it would be under the, because you could go up to, with this ordinance, you could go up to 1 point over the 44.2, which is 45.2, and it would be under that.
Okay, thank you.
Council DeCosta.
Thank you, Mr. President. This may have been discussed before, but I need to be clear. What's the reason to make this change? Is there an emergency, or why are we talking about this now?
It goes back to the collections that we had from the audit in the 2012 audit. The first quarter collections from the 2012 audit were lower than anticipated and lower than the town's track record at 42.76%. If you were to set the levy going off, say, 43%, the tax increase would be over 4.5%. Because when this budget was done in June, it was anticipated you'd have a 44.5% collection rate. So that difference, the swing from 44.5 to 42.76 the lower the collection rate, you'd have to raise the tax levy or the tax rate because of it. So we're now altering the ordinance that would allow the collection rate to rise and the tax rate to reduce.
Okay, so if this ordinance passes, has no relevance or any impact on the levy that may or may not be up for discussion, right? Two different issues altogether?
I don't,
Mayor?
I'm just adding, repetitive, but because of the collection rate that we had in the first quarter of last year, that dictates the tax rate, is a factor in establishing the tax rate on the budget that was passed last June. So if we don't make the change and we follow the ordinance, then the tax rate will be higher than what we had estimated. So that this, by bringing it on an average collection, which I stated before, was in 2004 when we implemented this ordinance, there wasn't a track record in terms of collection rate in the first quarter. Now we have that. It just makes a lot more sense because you don't want to be pushing up the collection rate so you can lower the tax artificially, and you don't want to be in a position where you're hamstrung on what historically has been a lower collection rate, and then that pushes up the tax rate. So what we're trying to do is give language that would align with what the budget called for, which was, as Brian said, was a 1.2% tax increase. We're able to bring that in slightly less than that tonight. So the reason for amending it, Counselor, is that if you don't amend it and you follow the ordinance, then the tax rate is going to be artificially high because of a lower collection rate in the first quarter of last year. And this gives you, like I said, I'll repeat again, but I think that it's a complicated issue, but by going on an average over a period of time, it doesn't give us an artificially high, and it doesn't give us a lower rate. We're able to select in what we've been averaging, which when Brian presents that, you're gonna see that it's really been in a real range, a real short range for several years. But just a move of a small amount does have an impact on your tax rate. Okay, so this helps us align the taxes, the tax estimate increase that we had last year. This helps us align with that.
Now, the current ordinance provides for a 3-year average?
No,
No?
just what was ordered in the prior year.
Well, there's language in the current ordinance that refers to,
I think it's just that 3 years of information must be provided.
now on this sheet that you just put on our desk, you have the collection rate, it looks like for the last 7 years. Is that correct?
That was shown in history, yes.
Huh?
Mr. President?
Counselor Dwyer?
I'm sorry. And I think, I don't want to speak for Brian, but I believe this applies to the next item
Yes.
we're going to be talking to.
Yes.
Not to confuse the two issues.
Right.
So to answer the councilor's question, I think we've got to realize there's 3 or 4 different terms that we're using. One is the assessment of the levy. Let's not confuse the levy with the tax rate, or one is used to get to the other one, but one is used, this first resolution we're talking about, 13-07, is just a method to get to our taxable base, if you will. And by our regulations that were passed some numbers of years ago, it's a very unique formula, somewhat complex, but nonetheless, it is a method of taking the tax rate, first year collection. You can only take what we collected in the first quarter. Jeff, I see you moving up front, and this is where I'd like to get you back here, because you were the author of this. So if you could do a better job.
We should probably have a workshop.
Well, I just want to answer like Councilor Lambie's question. The thing about the rate is that the ordinance is in place to put some parameters on it, so you can't go crazy with it, because you can make it 50% and tell everyone's going to be a 5% tax decrease, and then what really happens, and they don't find out that you had a deficit till the audit's done. But everybody's happy when they get their tax bill. Now you have a problem. So that the ordinance is there to confine that, to make sure that it's even though it's an estimate, it's your best estimate.
It's a fairly real number.
Right, based and
Not
in
made
this
up
way,
for political purposes.
there's some history. Right, there's some history. Now, if you were to, so it doesn't handicap you. In fact, if you didn't support this and you went on your current legislation, that would handicap you more. You would then, because I don't think the council should amend, or I don't even think it has the ability to amend the rate inside the levy. But so your only option would be to lower expenses to make it fit. So if you were to choose to want a 0% tax increase based on any ordinance, your only option would be to lower the expenses to meet, because that's what this levy's doing. It's filling in the gap between what you've collected up till now and what your projected expenses are, and then what are you going to collect in the first quarter. So that's how you arrive at this levy. So the only way you could do that. And based on the number, if you were using the current ordinance, you would have to cut expenses by over $1 million to make it fit. It'd probably be closer to $1.5 million if you were going to use the existing ordinance. So that collection percentage, any small amount makes a huge difference on the rate.
Council Kearns?
The question about changing the formulation from 3 to 5, is that a matter of convenience for dilution? Or why did you pick 5 and not 6 or 8 tax periods? And my next question would be, what's wrong with backing into what we're being taxed for now?
I think that if I could answer that, Councilor, Jeff didn't pick that, although we did speak to Jeff about the integrity of the ordinance. We just figured that the longer time frame you use, the more you're going to zero in on an accurate collection rate on an average, in particular when you have either or. You either have either you collected significantly less than you estimated, or it can actually work in reverse. If you happen to collect significantly more in that quarter for some reason, which is possible, and I can get into detail on that, but if the banks right now decide that they're going to fully fund all the taxes up front, as they pulled in 2010, they reduced the collection in the first quarter by almost $900,000. So you could have it both ways. You could have a spike, and you would have a number that would be significantly higher than average, which is going to cause you some significant problems, or you could have a lower collection. So a 5-year average seemed to make sense, seeing that we have that data.
All right, so in terms of risk, don't we have the reserves to absorb that $1 million if we did have an anomaly? Could we not fund an increase?
If you chose to reduce the budget that was approved in June, 9 months plus into the year that we're managing by $1 million, I wouldn't advise that. I think that would be very, very poor management in terms of that space, and the repercussions may not be felt immediately, but they would certainly be felt in the next year's budget and following those budgets, and some significant tax increases that would spike it above most likely spike it above your caps.
Just to reiterate, where you had said going from 3 years to 5 years, on the ordinance, it had stated that the town was required to state the previous 3 collection rates. It wasn't used, that was just on there for informational purposes. We changed it to 5 because you can now use a 5-year average. So the 3 that was listed on there, there wasn't using a 3-year average in the past. That was really just informational. It was just the prior year's collection rate in the audit.
What makes it informational then and not now?
It's still informational,
Yeah.
but it gives you the numbers that they're actually using, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would just add too, if you were going to, remember tonight, you're levying on projected expenses. So if you were going to cut the expenses, you need to do that before you levy it, because that would be like adding to the budget after you levy it. I mean, you're levying for expenses, so that's what the public is expecting. So it was tried one year where immediately after the levy, it was an attempt to add $250,000 to the budget. Well, you couldn't speak against. If you allowed that to happen, you couldn't come in front of the council and say, I don't want you to add $250 to the budget. I want it back in my taxes. So when you levy, you're levying based on those projected expenses. So if you have an inclination to reduce them, you should do it prior to the levy. That's just ethically, because that's what you're basing the levy. You're levying to cover your expenses. So if you're going to change them, you should change them before you levy them.
So on this worksheet, the projected expenses at 6/30/13 reflects the expenses in the budget we adopted last June?
Correct.
That is the number
Yes.
from that budget?
Yes.
So what we're doing is, you're in the middle of you're like 9 months or into the fiscal year of the
Correct.
budget, but we're collecting the money late. Like you use the money, because we're not synchronized,
Mm-hmm.
we're always using money from previous years to fund the budget. And if you don't send the tax bill out, you'll end up with a deficit. That's what they're telling you. You lower the tax rate and you collect less than, you're gonna have a deficit. And Moody's isn't gonna be too happy about that, for all you people that made an issue of that during the election last year.
Well, you did go into that, Mr. President. Also, we have to transmit the information to Opal for billing by April 11th, so the bills can go out by May 1st, so.
Does this get approved by the Division of Municipal Finance at the state level?
What's that?
Does this go to the state level
No,
for approval?
that's done in June when the budget's adopted.
Okay,
This is,
so they approved that based on this?
Yes.
Estimated tax rate.
correct.
What determines the collection rate?
Who's the question?
What determines the collection rate?
Well, by this ordinance,
that's-
it should be what you have reasonably collected over the last few years.
No, I don't mean
The only
in
thing
terms
I
of
would
the-
say is you
what-
should not.
What determines the actual collection rate, not theory?
Oh, well,
The
what's,
levy divided by, what you collected.
right.
Or what you collected divided by the levy. If you look on that audit page, every year there'll be.
Where's the amount we collected on this?
For example, in the 2012 audit, page 91,
Yeah,
current year taxes was current year tax collections, so what we collected was 25,316,321.
all right,
Now, the levy for the year was 59,203,614,
yeah.
resulting in the collection rate of 42.76%.
Does it mean we're only collecting 42% of?
Just that quarter.
Of the money?
So that was in that quarter, so that may,
Just that quarter?
in that first quarter.
All right,
Or the
and-
last quarter of the fiscal year.
So you're actually, if you put it over the 4-year period, what would the total rate be? The
Within-
4-quarter period, I'm sorry.
Within this levy, when we get to the levy, the next item, the town is still budgeting or proposing a 98% collection rate as a whole.
Okay.
This is just for that
That's
first
pretty
quarter.
damn good, I would think.
Mhm.
Now, you're indicating that some of the problems that resulted in this number being artificially low is that you didn't do a tax sale, or Mr. Warner wasn't able to do it because he wasn't here?
I don't really want to speculate on the past, but we believe that was a factor.
Part of the 98% in our budget includes collections from previous tax years, correct?
Yes.
All right. Counselor Murray?
Just to be clear, it's all driven by that first quarter collection, is that?
From a prior year, yes. As
So-
how the ordinance is written right now, the prior year's collection rate is, we're bound by that in the future year.
So there's no adjusting or anything, that is the way it's figured then?
As it stands right now, it's that prior year. We'd like a little more flexibility with that, and that's why we'd like to use that 5-year average. So we can either use that 1 year, the last prior year, or a 5-year average.
Right, okay, thank you.
So if
Just
you
again
use
to
the
guard-
prior year collection rate, you're saying in order to balance the budget, we would have to increase the tax rate
Yes, by,
and collect all this money that you don't need? Is that it?
not that you don't need,
Well,
no.
collect extra money that would,
No, you see, you have this amount that you have to collect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the ordinance is saying that you can, when you devise the levy, you can only use 42.76, let's
Yes.
say. It's just an equation. If you take what you need, 42.76 of X, 42.76X equals what you need. Then you just do the math. And if you do the math, you're gonna come up with a higher rate than you wanna come up with. It's not that
people
you're
are gonna pay more
Now, if you
taxes.
if you collect more than 42.76, you're gonna have a surplus.
Right.
If you collect less, you're gonna have a deficit.
Okay.
Well, why would you wanna use this number that historically is the lowest that we've seen? Now, you might wanna be conservative and say, well, I don't wanna risk it. I wanna stay at the 42.76, and therefore, I'm going to have to raise the rate just in case, because if it
Right.
does come in 42.76, you're gonna be right on the money, or pretty close. But
Yeah.
if it doesn't, either way, you're gonna determine a surplus or a deficit. So if you wanted to bring it up based on historical averages, that would seem to be prudent, as long as it doesn't get carried, you don't get carried away.
you
So
don't
that's
make
the
it
constraint.
50%.
Right,
Right.
so you're basically taking an average so that you can make your best guess, whichever way you fall on it, depending on other factors as to where you're running right now, is gonna have a difference, but
So if everyone paid their taxes in quarterly installments, the collection rate would be 25%, right?
Yes,
Okay,
if everybody paid and everything.
all right. Counselor Kearns, question?
So I'm hearing in between that because of the performance issues of not collecting in a single period, historically, due to tax sales, who weren't following another ordinance to force these people to pay their taxes, we have to raise this to get that money sooner. So we're not going to get that money in this year, is what you're telling me.
Right now, see, the budget's already been adopted where you have, within the current budget for 13,
I'm clear on that.
yep, we have a budget of 26,800,000. With the assessed values that's there, and when you factor in if you were to use the collection rate of the 42.76, it would then work out to, you'd have a rate increase of over 4.5%. That's why they kind of swing each other either way, whether it be the collection rate up and down,
So by using more periods, you've
Well, we have more of a
diluted that
truer,
down to 1.5%
we have a truer average on what the.
to make up for what we failed to do in the first quarter.
I don't know what you mean by failed to do.
Well, they're saying that we didn't collect, we didn't have sales.
Well, the taxes aren't required to be paid, that's the problem, see? And when you're estimating the collection, you're not required to pay more than 25% if you're a resident. If you want to take advantage of the discount, then that's where the difference makes up. And also, a lot of the mortgage companies in previous years would pay all the taxes up front.
Correct.
And then there was a trend, if I'm not incorrect, that the mortgage companies started paying them quarterly. That's not the administration's fault.
No, it's not.
Right. Mayor?
I just wouldn't describe it as some sort of a management failure there. I mean, it's difficult to predict what this economy is doing on people's ability to pay taxes, not pay taxes. There's a number of factors here, but remember, we're talking about less than a point and a half on the collection rate. This is not 20% on the collection rate. Jeff and I served on a town council when the collection rate went down to less than 30%. Now, if we had less than a 30% collection rate in the first quarter at any given time, I think that I've dropped the ball. We're talking about, a margin of error here inside of a point. So there's economy factors coming in, and we don't have the liberty to talk to Steve at this point in time. But Steve knew what he was doing. He was managing the strategy based on what he felt as though long term was in best interest of the town. And he may have determined at the time that he was going to run that tax sale into the next fiscal year, and not in the current one we're in, feeling as though that was, in his opinion, that's the way to handle it. So, but the margin of error here is very, very small. So this is not somehow like you dropped the ball. I'll tell you what will drop the ball, and it has happened before, is if somehow there's an inaction and we don't get the levy and the tax rate approved in time to get the bills out by April 30th, and then you run a risk, which we have in this town, of getting bills out 6 weeks late, which drove that 30% collection rate. I can tell you that right now.
And also a deficit in the prior year because of
A
the
huge
time.
deficit, and as Brian has alluded to, and I think this is part of the conversation that rolls, I mean, what we're talking about here is a matter of a fairly, simple adjustment into a current ordinance that we found that there's a flaw in the way it was structured in a year where you have a lower rate than what you normally would have. But and then some of this conversation would kind of is bleeding into the next part of the agenda. But Mr. President, if there's a printing time frame that we're well within, but if this lingers in any way, and then the bills go out, time is money in collections, and there's no question about the bills go out that are received on May 1 or in that range are going to have a higher collection rate on bills that are mailed that way than bills that are mailed on May 18th. And there's a big, big difference in terms of the way that collection rate rolls
Also
in.
have to spend more money on interest on the TANs, right?
That goes without saying. Your TANs it'll impact your following year considerably in terms of your cash flow. And we're also sitting on TANs right now that are due July 1, that we are counting on this revenue on a historical basis to come in prior to June 30th.
Right.
So if you delay the bill cycle, that could always, we place pretty close to the vest in this town. So that could cause you some problems.
I just have one Councilor Kern question. Actually, by allowing you to raise the rate, that money could be what people haven't paid via a tax sale. It would work the other way. It's allowing you to lower the rate instead of, if you use the old ordinance, you'd have the people who are actually paying on time would actually be supplementing the people who haven't paid. So it's working actually to your interest in that point. It's actually working to your advantage that way, because if they have a tax sale, that could boost up that your previous year collection, which would make this less. So it would be in your advantage this way. The other way, it actually forces you to have to raise it higher than you would.
Well, I think the bottom line is that this is not an ordinance every town has, first of all. This was an ordinance that Councilor Mutter adopted in a time of fiscal irresponsibility, basically, there's no other way to put it, in order to ensure that there was no politics involved in the budget process by setting an artificially low tax rate for political purposes, and then at the end, finding out these are the things that drive cities and towns like, the ones we're all familiar with, into the situations they're in. And we're really proposing a modest amendment to what is designed to be a guide post, if you will, for setting the levy within conservative guidelines. The author of the original ordinance is before us and is in support of it. Anything else? Anybody else want to speak in favor or against? We already declared the public hearing closed anyway. So further discussion.
Mr. President?
Council Lambie.
I just want to thank Mr. Motter for taking time out to be here tonight to explain such a complicated issue. It seems clear to me, or clearer, I guess I should say, that this is something that's meant to protect the town from itself to a certain degree, and as Mr. Higgins pointed out, prevent politics from playing a significant role in causing the budgets of future budgets to be unattainable. So, I'll be voicing my support for this resolution.
Thank you. Further discussion. Councilor Schmidt? Oh, you got your light on, okay. No further discussion, a roll call vote. Councilor Dwyer?
Yes.
Councilor Lambie?
Yes.
Councilor Murray?
Yes.
Councilor DeCosta?
Yes.
Councilor Kearns?
Yes.
Councilor Schmidt?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. The ordinance passes 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Mutter, as usual. Now comes the hard part. New business. Resolution R1321, a resolution authorizing the tax assessment. It's an interesting word that you added there. Tax assessment levy, fiscal year 2012-2013. Sylvia?
I passed out for each of you a memo. I'd just like to say before I get started that there is no change within the memo between what was on the agenda originally and this. It was just meant to provide a little bit more clarity and more of an explanation to the town's proposal for the levy for for FY13. Within the proposal, the administration is proposing a levy increase of 1.53% and a rate increase of 1.06%. with a collection rate within the first quarter of 44.35%, which would realize a final net levy of $60,469,628. This is an increase over the prior levy of $909,018, and within the resolution itself, it provides for a range of $59,100,000 to $61,100,000. One item of note also on page 2.
So the levy increase is 1.53%.
Correct.
What is the current state cap?
State cap is 4%.
4%.
The town has a ordinance on the books where it cannot have a
Three.
rate over 3%.
All right.
That's the rate, then the
So
state has a levy.
that number, 1.53,
Is a levy.
is the number that we have to conform to our own ordinance and state law.
No, they're separate. The ordinance, the state law is a 4% cap on the levy, where the
Right.
town is proposing a 1.53. The
That's
ordinance
right.
the town has imposed is a 3% rate increase, where the town has a 1.06.
I don't think that statute applies to the tax rate. It applies to the levy.
I thought one was 3, one was...
The state is on the levy. And the town is on the rate.
The tax rate, the town's on the rate.
Yes.
Okay. So they're really two separate things.
Yes.
They are too, and they can play against each other, as we've had in front of the council before, where the state levy was at one time below our town cap. In this case, in this circumstances, it's higher. So it can change, and you have to be aware of both.
Now, account for the difference in the levy increase and the tax rate increase.
That is
That-
associated with
Is
the,
that additional value?
that is correct. The value of,
Yeah, I'm trying to start to understand some of this stuff.
if no change was made, if the rates were remained the same, the levy itself would be up 0.55%. There is an increase in value that provides for an additional levy of $327,975.
Thank you.
So that's before any rate increase.
Questions?
Mr. President?
Council Lambie?
Mr. Sylvia, I just want to be clear, and I want to be sure that my fellow councilors are clear that if we did not increase the tax rate this year and we left it at $15.61, you're saying that the total taxes would still increase for the town by $327,000, even though we would not increase the rate on our taxpayers?
The levy would increase by nearly $328,000, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
The levy, that's not an increase of taxes paid. I mean, it's an increase of the overall total of taxes paid, but not on the individual basis.
Correct.
Right. Because you have more, if you build more houses, you collect more taxes. That's basically a simple version of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you bring more industry in, or if tax treaties expire, correct? All these things factor into this. Thank you, Council Lambie. Other questions? This is not easy to understand, and I know that we have 4 new councilors on the council going through this basically for the first time, other than sitting in the audience, obviously, but
Mr. President?
Council Lambie.
Mr. Sylvia, if we were to propose an amendment to the resolution in Section 1 relative to the amount of tax range that could be levied, and we wanted that range to reflect the current tax rate that the residents are currently paying, do you know what that range would be?
So you're speaking of with the rate remaining, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
In
So
Section
you'd like the
1,
range for if the rate was,
if it remained unchanged, so if
Okay.
it remained at 1561 per thousand,
yep.
what would those numbers be? Do you know, or can you
Yeah.
help us with that?
Why don't you explain also why there's a range?
Okay.
That always gets
There is a
some-
range, just because, again, if supplemental bills go out, and also abatements. So there's a range because taxes will be coming off, and new bills will go out. So there is provided a range, and because of collections, it varies from year to year, but for the most part, it's roughly $1 million to $1.5 million under whatever the levy is, and about $500,000 over the levy.
Okay.
It's varied on that, but that's about been the average. Where
But
it's
once
about
the bills go out, they're out.
right.
So,
But there are abatements, there are-
What are
there
you
are
going to
items
send them? I mean, you say you're on a deadline, a tight deadline.
Yes.
When you send it to the billing company, is that it? What are you sending them? What number?
Whatever is once this is done tonight, the tax assessor will be setting the tax rate, the levy, and will be certifying with the clerk, and she'll be sending it off by the 11th. So whatever is
So this range of 500,000?
Yes.
Because if
That-
1
that's
million
again
down
due
doesn't-
to-
Doesn't bother us.
that's again due to, say, abatements.
That is due to the time period between now and the 11th?
No,
No?
no.
I'm trying to understand why you have a range then.
Because
I
of
understand
abatements
why you have a
and
range.
any supplemental bills that go out, and because of abatements that would remove
When
taxes.
did that happen?
Throughout the year, I think we had abatements at the last meeting. There are abatements regularly.
Yeah, I understand that. What I don't understand is how, once you send out the bills,
This is ensuring, so at the end of the year, the taxes collected are somewhere within this range. So when all the taxes go out and are paid, and any
all right,
abatements are
so
accounted for,
let's
and
say
any,
the initial tax bill that's sent is
Yep.
for the number on this sheet.
Mhm.
And then you find that because of a decline in assessed value, because
No.
of abatements,
Abatements, yeah.
and because of, or an increase in assessed value. You may need to send out a supplemental bill on a particular piece of property.
Well, the assessor can send out supplemental bills, yes, and that'll change the role, so will abatements. So
For
once,
instance-
at the end of the year, we have to be able to come in within these numbers.
Okay.
So that's
So
why.
for instance, when there's a house built in the state, bless you, state law allows us to, once that building permit is issued, issue them a supplemental bill.
Mhm.
That's not included in the package of the original bills.
Right.
All right. Further questions?
Mr. President.
Councilor Lambie?
So do we have a number, Mr. Sylvia, that we can put in the resolution that would basically allow us a range if we were to leave the tax rate at $15.61? Are there numbers that you would be comfortable with?
I can give you the numbers, but then I'd like to address that further.
If you lower the tax rate, you have to lower expenses. Did you not understand what Councilor Mutter said?
Okay.
Is that directed at me?
Yes.
Oh, I certainly understood Mr. Mutter, Mr. President, but what I'm suggesting is that we leave the tax rate the same, not decrease anything. And I understand that the levy would be $327,000 higher if we leave the rate exactly the same. So what I'm trying to get at is if we leave the rate exactly the same, unchanged from last year, and the levy is still expected, our property tax bills are supposed to still go up by $327,000. I'd like to know what that new bill is with the $327,000, what the new total is.
That would, if the rates would remain the same for the FY13 levy, you'd be looking at, because again, the budget was adopted, that was adopted in 13, you'd be, and there was a levy that was projected in that, you'd be looking at a projected deficit for next year of $570,000. It would result in a collection rate of 44.8%, which is, again, 2% over what was collected last year at 42.76. And you're really, with what we do have coming down the pike with the additional expenses next year, with whether it be OPEB, whether it be the pension issue, the schools, we'd be short nearly $570,000 with the result of this.
I don't understand that, because you just said that if we went with the rate proposal of $15.77,
Yes,
that we would only be raising $900,000.
correct.
So, and if we leave it the same, we're going to be raising $300,000.
Correct.
It's only a $600,000 difference.
Yeah, I
Now
just
all of a
said
sudden, we're
570.
losing millions of dollars if we leave the rate the same?
No, we'd be at $570,000 less for next year. And I was just speaking to, in addition to all of the expenses that are going to be coming down the pike, before we get to that, we're going to be at a shortfall of $570,000.
We would be at the same levy collection as the current year, which is about $60 million, plus another $300,000.
But
is
what
you
was
just said.
budgeted in the current year's budget was a rate increase of 1.2% and a levy and a collection rate of 44.5. That was budgeted when the budget was adopted in June.
So when you say next year, you're talking about 2014?
Yes.
But last spring, the council didn't approve anything to do with 2014.
Well, they adopted the 26.8 million that's in the FY13 budget, which is tied to FY14, because that's the first collection. Then the next three collections of that year is in FY14.
The budget that was adopted last year, the 40% of that tax levy that was discussed in these chambers last spring was collected before June 30th, 43%, right?
Mhm.
So that would mean that the balance of that levy, or about 58%, was collected last summer, last fall, this winter,
Mhm.
and now over the next couple of months.
Okay,
Right,
yeah.
that's pretty much the end of that cycle, as it will be. It will end in a couple of months,
That was adopted in June?
last June.
what was adopted in June, that was the last piece of that budget was the rate that you will be adopting tonight, which also affects a good portion of FY14 as well.
The 2014 budget.
Correct.
In other words, what parameters you start with.
Yes.
So you're going to automatically have a $500,000 hole
Correct.
to fill
Yes.
in the next budget, not to mention a deficit.
Mhm.
So we're pre-mandated?
We're unsynchronized, because, that's how it works. Well, we're the only town that isn't. It has its advantages in terms of knowing how much you actually have spent, as opposed to guessing. So as you see, he estimated a 1.2% tax rate last June when the budget was passed. It allows him to come back and actually lower that rate, in this case to 1.03 or 1.06.
Correct. And that's again
And if
based
you were
on the,
unsynchronized, you would set the levy at the time of the adoption of the budget.
correct.
If you were synchronized, I mean. And so we would have already put in a tax increase of 1.2% and ended up with a surplus.
Mhm.
So in some respects, based on the representations that were made of a 1.2 versus a 1.03, we're already reducing the tax rate that we were estimating back in June, that when the public hearings were held. This is really not the place to look at reducing the tax rate. If you want to discuss reducing spending in the next fiscal year, and therefore maintaining the tax rate estimate or reducing that estimate, then we're going to need a discussion on expenses and where you want to cut them. And we know we have a lot of obligations that we have to deal with in terms of our unfunded liabilities and so forth. We have a school committee looking for a $1.6 million increase. But to do it during this adoption of this ordinance, which has been characterized in the past as a mere formality to basically put a stamp of approval on the work of the fiscal year, the budget that's already was passed by this council in the previous council, to change that is very irresponsible fiscally. Is there any public comment? Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I'd like to ask a question about the synchronization of the process. Why are we unsynchronized, and why don't we move towards a synchronization if it simplifies things?
Could I take a stab at that?
Sure. Councilor Dwyer?
At this point, we're nearly 9 months through our budget, so to speak. We're always in the rears. My point of view is that we have a better idea of what's going to happen. Let me put it to you this way. How would you like to project what's going to happen in the next 2.5 months, or would you like to project what's going to happen in the next 12 months? Which do you think would be easier for you?
To me, the simple equation is get a process that people understand, and we can spend less time trying to understand it ourselves. So if everybody else is synchronized and Cumberland is the only town unsynchronized, it tells me that maybe we should be synchronized.
Maybe we're the ones doing it right and everybody else
I
is
like
not doing
the
it
I like
right.
the idea of knowing what the real number is personally. So and I guess also, Councilor DaCosta, the cost of synchronization will require us to borrow significant sums of money.
Ah, okay, it's all right. So that's a different story.
We would have to pay the shortfall.
Thereby increasing the tax rate.
$30 and $40 million that you would have to borrow.
Because
Okay.
you gotta make up for that lost money.
All right, I
right.
understand. Thank you.
And that's not to say you're going to have a system that's better, because I think this system is better.
I do too.
But anyway, that's my personal.
We went through this a while back when former school committee member Brian Kelly, there was an important issue for him and tried to convince us to go synchronized.
I had the same conversation with a gentleman by the name of Peter Schaefer, and some of those may have been in the room, and he started popping his pills by the time he got done trying to explain to me why we were better on the synchronized year rather than the non-synchronized year.
Right.
So again, the only option at this point is to approve the tax increase.
Well, unless you want to run a deficit.
Well, you don't want to do that as well, but since the expenses have been approved already, the only way to meet them is to come up with the money.
That's right.
So,
Mr. President?
Yes, Council Levy.
I'm looking at last year's fiscal, the budget that was proposed for fiscal 2012 to 2013. That per property tax levy was proposed to be $58.7 million. We're being asked tonight to approve a levy that is between 59.1 and 61.1. And no matter how you slice that math, it's much greater than 1%. And I need some explanation on that, because if this council approved a budget last spring for $58.7 million in property taxes, and now this council is being asked and told that we're going to allow for a 1% tax increase that's going to generate $61 million, that's a lot more than 1%.
I think it has to do with the difference between the levy and the tax rate. The total spending or the total collected, if that's the number you're going at, is actually 1.53, correct?
Mm-hmm. Backing into, again, this is, the sheet from last year was just pulled from Mr. Warner's file. I didn't alter it at all, but it has a 1.2% rate increase in there, a rate of 15.79%, rate of 15.79, a collection rate of 44.5, and that was, again, raising taxes, raising revenue in FY13, the fourth quarter of $26,818,000 to $280,000, and that's with the expenses for the year of $82,882,000.
So the residential rate, real estate rate in Mr. Warner's estimate.
That's what was projected, yeah,
in
and
June
estimated.
was 1579?
Yes.
And yours is 1578? 776.
Yes.
Councilor Dwyer moves passage of the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Murray. Further discussion.
Mr. President,
Councilor Lambie.
I would like to propose an amendment to the resolution. I suspect I have to wait for that.
Nope, this is the proper time.
I would like to make a motion to amend the higher end of the range on line 22 of the resolution, that amount be changed from $61,100,000 to $59,900,000.
Councilor Lambie moves an amendment to amend the resolution on line 22 by changing the number $61,100,000 to $59,900,000.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Schmidt. Discussion of the amendment.
Question, Mr. President.
Councilor Kearns.
Council Lambert, could you explain why you want to lower it?
The audit from this most recent fiscal year stated that our property tax collections were $59.2 million. If our levy is increased just through mere increase in tax base, that would increase automatically without any rate changes, increase our collections to about $59.5 million. My thought is that I understand there needs to be some type of range, I felt that keeping that range within 400,000 of that number I just mentioned was a reasonable range.
But the levy calls for a final net levy of $60,469,000, Council Lambie. Your number is below that number. Council Kearns, you all set?
Yeah, and my next question would have been, Mr. Sylvia, what impact would Mr. Lamby's decision have?
Mr.
I
Silver?
think Mr. Higgins just answered it.
Yes.
If you could elaborate on that.
I'm sorry.
If this amendment were to be approved by the council, what impact would that have on town finances?
It would be a reduction in the levy. Again, our levy that we're proposing right now is 60,469,000, so this would be a reduction. I don't have in front of me how much of a reduction, but it'd be a rate reduction, and we'd be looking at a deficit.
Do you want to say something there? Or as Mr. Sylvia and I covered?
I think Brian did better than I could have done.
All right. Further discussion on the amendment. On the amendment, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Hey. It fails 4-3.
There was one abstaining, I think.
Want a roll call vote? Councilor Schmidt?
Yes.
Councilor Kearns?
Yes.
Councilor DeCosta?
Yes.
This is on the amendment.
Right, for the 59,900.
Councilor Murray?
Wow.
Councilor Lambie?
Yes.
Councilor Dwyer?
No.
The chair votes no. The amendment carries 4-3. I have no idea.
I'll have to veto that bill. There's no way, you can't manage the town. This budget was passed last year. It was managed as it was passed, and what was just put forward, it was an impossibility to manage the budget because you have to lower the rate below 1.06. That's what that amendment did.
The amendment just put a hole in the budget.
Yes.
Yes, and I will veto that budget tomorrow morning.
I don't know what the procedure is, but
Well-
this is a resolution on a levy. I've never seen anything like this happen before.
You set the levy, and then the rate follows.
Right.
The council doesn't set the rate. And so we put in front of you what that levy, that space is going to allow us to tax, but we also provide you through the levy sheet what the rate is going to be. So you have no flexibility in terms of when you pass that piece of, that levy sheet. It's a 1.06 rate based on the spread on the levy. What I believe just happened is that you're not going to be able to do a 1.06 rate based on that spread.
It's a zero.
It's a zero. And so you kind of got outmaneuvered a little bit by some song and dance up there, and you put the town at risk. So if you want to keep on going on that road, I'll veto to that. I will veto that bill. I will veto that. I will veto that action by the council.
Can the mayor veto resolutions, Mr. Hafner?
That'd be the first for me. I've never quite seen a vote.
That's why I kind of believe all along that this levy bill should be an ordinance. Because the mayor can veto ordinances.
I don't even know what you have in front of me, other than the fact I know we've just created a deficit. That's the first time I've seen a council do that. But I'll have to I'll have to do some research for you.
Yeah. Well, you'll be doing it for the mayor, I guess.
Well, I know I'll do it for the
My
department heads or the mayor.
concern is that
The other thing that, Mr.
we have
President,
only authorized the collection of $59,900,000.
Yeah.
When the finance director is telling us we need $60,469,628.
this will delay the mailing of those bills.
Delay the mailing of the bills. It's going to cause us to be in a central Coventry Fire District situation.
Well, Mr. President, may I?
Council Lambie.
Please. I'm sure that is not the intention of the 4 councilmen who voted for this mayor. And secondly, this town has enjoyed $5.4 million in surpluses in the last 2 years collectively. $5 million. And we're talking up here about $300,000 or $400,000 of assessments. Now, the intent of this council's decision this evening appears to be we're trying to send a message to the mayor's office, and that is that we're looking for a rate increase of 0. The taxpayers in this town have been saddled with enough taxes in the last 4 or 5 years, including the last 2 years in which this town has enjoyed substantial surpluses. Thank you.
Could I get to respond on that, Mr. President?
Sure.
Thank you. First of all, what you passed there, you can do anything you want in one fiscal year. It's very easy. The way that we're set up, 1 year follows another year, follows another year. You heard from the finance director that what you just did is going to put a hole in next year's budget of almost $600,000. So the problem is the lack of your understanding in terms of how the town operates is putting the town in fiscal jeopardy. So that's what has happened with that vote. I don't believe that any one of the council members really understood what you were trying to maneuver and manipulate. Anybody who voted in the negative can bring that up right now and fix that problem, because it's a serious problem. It's not a small problem. So you walk out of here and there's a headline, oh my God, 0 tax increase. Next year you got a huge problem. We're talking about a 1% tax increase. That's what was promised last year to the public. And that's what has been delivered by this administration. Anybody who voted the negative can bring that up for reconsideration immediately. I'd suggest you do.
It's the opposite, Mayor. You have to be voted in the affirmative.
Right, anybody who voted for that, that's correct.
Mr. President,
Councilor DeCosta.
I am sure that Councilor Levy had the interests of the town first and foremost when he brought up his point of 0 tax increase. I also share that vision of no higher taxes. It's no secret, all these years we've had the same discussion, and I am not for higher taxes, period. I sympathize with the mayor's position, though. We already authorized this spending. Now we are tying his hands. The town will be again in a disadvantage. That's not the way to proceed. I suggest that we rethink the last vote, and moving forward that we definitely make it a point to control expenses on the next budget. At this point, not knowing the protocol of reconsidering, are we allowed to vote again, not to vote again?
Under Robert's Rules of Order, within a reasonable
I
period.
just don't like to have the town in a position that the finance director won't have any money, not any money, but will be on a deficit.
Under Robert's Rules of Order, within a reasonable period of time, a member who voted in the affirmative on the previous vote can make a motion to reconsider. I consider Councilor DeCosta's comments to be a motion to reconsider. Now, Mr. Hafner,
That's
the
correct.
second doesn't have to come from the affirmative vote, does it?
I'm sorry, please?
The second doesn't have to come from
No.
the affirmative vote. Is there a second? Councilor Dwyer seconds it. Is there discussion on the motion to reconsider?
What do we,
No,
what is it?
there's someone who votes,
Motion to reconsider the previous vote.
it's a
meaning-
motion, it's the motion to reconsider
The motion.
the original motion that was voted
There's a
on.
motion to reconsider the previous vote, which was to pass your amendment, Council Lambie.
Correct, and we're trying to approve
And all
enough.
that, when you vote yes, you will be voting to vote, you will be making a vote to vote again.
So you can vote on the amendment.
Let me make myself clear once again, Mr. President, that this suggestion, it's only to remedy what it's been approved by the council before. We cannot approve
You have to do the amendment.
a budget and now not allow enough money to cover that.
It's a reconsideration on the amendment to the original
No,
motion.
this is a motion to reconsider, so we would reconsider the motion.
The
original motion.
amendment, not the
Correct,
motion, because the
The
motion's still on the
amendment,
floor.
That's correct. We have not moved the whole question yet. All right, so it's a motion to reconsider. Shall the council reconsider the previous vote Councilor Schmidt.
No.
Councilor Kearns. Yes. Councilor DeCosta.
I say yes.
Councilor Murray.
Yes.
Councilor Lambie.
No.
Councilor Dwyer.
Yes.
Chair votes yes. We now have before us again Councilor Lambie's motion to amend. On the motion to amend, is there further discussion? Hearing none. Councilor Schmidt.
Yes.
Councilor Kearns. No. Councilor DeCosta.
No.
Councilor Murray.
No.
Councilor Lambie.
Yes.
Councilor Dwyer.
No.
The chair votes no. The motion to amend fails 5-2. On the resolution as presented, further discussion. Councilor Dwyer.
Yes.
Councilor Lambie. On the resolution.
No.
Councilor Murray.
Yes.
Councilor DeCosta.
Yes.
Councilor Kearns. Councilor Schmidt.
No.
Council, the chair votes yes. The resolution passes 5-2. As I said,
Freaking manipulated that guy.
the counselor, I know that we've already voted. I just want to say that we recognize Councilor DeCosta has taken a strong position on tax increases and has voted in the past for no tax increase. But I do respect him tonight, and I am concerned with that position as we proceed with the budget process. But I do respect his decision to honor the vote of his fellow councilors last June. Thank you, Councilor. Public comment. Councilor Mutter. I used to be able to call you Chairman Mutter, Vice Chairman Mutter.
I'm just gonna, it's a little problematic when we talk about the levy. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, and though it may be confusing, I think it's something that you should spend some time on making it less confusing. That being said, the sanctity of that is vitally important. So if Councilor Lambie wanted to lower that number, the appropriate thing to do would have been to reopen a budget a long time ago and make those expenses. When you do it tonight, you give no one an opportunity to come and speak for those cuts that you would make after you already voted in the levy. So in a transparent way, if you were going to reduce the highway department because you lowered that levy, no one could come here and speak against it because they didn't know you were going to do it. When you set that levy, it's got to meet the expenses of the budget. You want to change it, go through the budget process and amend those numbers, because other than that, no one has an idea what you're doing. And on Monday night at 5:30, or whatever time it is, 6:30, and after these deliberations, you can come in and you can make that happen, and that's not right. So, and that's vitally important. I would argue that, tonight is one of the most important things you do, and certainly, given that ordinance prior, the due diligence is certainly the right thing to do. And knowing what you're doing here, this is not this is a serious issue. This is a serious vote. And so I get what your intent was, but you got to be better. You really have to just be better, and that's not a problem. But you've got to let people know where those, because if that amendment had not been voted down, you would have been forced to to reduce expenses somewhere, and you would have no real opportunity to not do it.
Basically 2 months period left.
And you would have had to do it, and no one could speak against it because you've already levied it. You've boxed it in. So that was my point at the beginning, where after we set the levy one time, we want to come in and add expenses. Well, by that time I already taxed you. I can't. Maybe you didn't want to spend the extra $250,000. Maybe you wanted some tax relief. I already sent you your bill, so that that's. And I wasn't on the council, but I spoke against that. So there really is that sanctity there that when you pass the levy, it has to balance with those expenses, as Councilor DeCosta said. And if you want it to be less, which I would have, depending on what they were, I may have had some discussion on that. But I'm really here, to be honest with you, I'm not here representing any other than the fact that there's a lot of work that went into that ordinance in '04, and a lot of work that previous councilors and really strong finance directors worked with over that time, and it really is not something to be joking around about. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment? Adjournment. Oh, Chairman Bill.
I also wanted to thank Chairman Costa. I really appreciate your efforts in reconsideration. The district, I think, would have been impacted by Councilor Lambie's resolution and his budget amendment. I think it would have been completely inappropriate to do that to the district when the district has worked very hard with the administration and with the council, the former council, to truly try to address student achievement, and to do this at the 11th hour without any notice, as the chairman has stated, I think is it's short-sighted, and the phone works both ways. You certainly could have called any one of us, Counselor, and expressed any concerns that you may have had. Thank you.
Well, we don't know if any cuts could have been made in that period of time, but certainly there would have had to been some sort of emergency if we wanted to at least try to avoid that deficit that Mr. Sylvia indicated would be coming. But in any event, we've debated it. The motion's it's over. Public comment. Adjournment. By Councilor Kearns, seconded by Councilor Schmidt. All in favor? Aye. Those against? Passes 7-0. The meeting is adjourned. 7:55 p.m.